topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, hello, Tampa. Welcome to another Ask the Expert show where we bring you the top experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. This is the last Tuesday. God, I can't believe this is the last Tuesday in March. We're getting ready to go into April already. But that means Kay Bender-Rimbaum, one of our top shows. They've actually been with us for almost 12 years now. And we have got a great show for the next 50 minutes. You know, if you live in a condo or a HOA association, you're going to love this show. If you're a board member or a management company, you're going to love this show. Let me introduce our great expert who's with us every month, attorney Kirsten Hintz. Good afternoon, Kirsten.
Hello, Steve.
How are you?
I'm okay. I was just listening to you saying that we're at the end of March. I can't believe it myself.
Can you believe that? I mean, didn't we just have New Year's? And it's really great. We've got Easter coming up this Sunday, and just wow, time passes. But hey, we're here now, and tell people we see that we have so many new people join the show every month. Friends, people are telling their neighbors about the show, other board members. Tell people about Kay Bender-Rimbaum.
Sure. So if you're a new listener, welcome to the show. Kay Bender-Rimbaum is an exclusive community association law firm. So that means that we represent your condominium, your HOA, and your cooperative associations throughout the state of Florida. Our main office is in South Florida, in Pompano Beach, Florida, but we have since grown and expanded, and so we do have other office locations, including in Palm Beach Gardens, in the Orlando area, and then on the west coast of Florida, which is located in Tampa, and I manage the West Coast office for the firm. We have, I believe, now 26 attorneys throughout the state. And I have been personally with the firm since 2010 and practicing law, I guess, a little over 17 years, close to 18. I don't even know anymore. But yeah, that's about it.
I don't think I've ever asked you this before. What made you decide to go into community association law?
Oh gosh, I don't even remember. In my first job at a small law firm, we started dabbling a little bit into this area of the law, and I found it interesting. And Kay Bender happened to have an ad. They were looking for an associate at the time, and I thought, why the heck? So I applied, and here we are.
You know, one of the things I love about Kay Bender-Rimbaum is you concentrate basically in one area, community association law. But you know, there's other firms out there, and you look at their specialties, so to say. They got bankruptcy, they got estate planning. I mean, there's like 8 or 9 different areas of law, and then you see at the bottom community association law. And I've learned doing this show as long as I have, when you have a firm that mainly concentrates in one area of law, you get so much better results.
Yes. So this is our exclusive practice area. So we don't practice, personal injury or bankruptcy or criminal law. This is the one and only practice area you'll find in the practice section of our website. So that means that we do this 24/7. So one of the benefits of for those boards who are looking for legal counsel. One of the benefits of finding a firm that specializes in this area of the law is that, we've been doing this in and out. And so, while some research is required depending on the topic, we know about service animals. We know generally what the law is. We might have to do research to make sure, there's no additional updates. But, you don't have to spend hours and hours and hours, of research that probably another law firm that's not specialized in association law would have to do. So
What, I look at these other people who are trying to do what Kay Bender Rimbaum does so well. And I look at the comments, and it seems like the ones that, have all these different specialty areas, they have the most derogatory notes. If you look at Kay Bender, I mean, I have never seen anything derogatory about Kay Bender. And, the letters we get are thank from your board members saying what a great job you've done for their association.
Well, thank you, Steve. I mean, we certainly try, and part of our job is also to educate our board members, our property managers. We spend a lot of time, educating. So yeah. You ready to move on to some questions?
Yes, we are. I've got so many questions here for you today. I want to start off in this one area. I don't understand. When we first started with you 12 years ago, God, service animals was on everybody's mind. I mean, that's all people asked about. Now we rarely get any questions about service animals, but we got one from Jim in Tampa. He said, can we ask for too much as a board in regards to support animals?
So yes, and it depends. Depends on whether the owner or the occupant is seeking accommodation with regard to a service animal as opposed to an emotional support animal. So, under fair housing laws, which is what applies to community associations, the law uses the word assistance animal to describe both service animals, such as an animal that helps a blind person, right, or pushes a wheelchair, as opposed to an emotional support animal that's there to, support the individual with the disability. So generally speaking, and this is just a synopsis, right? Like we actually teach a class on, fair housing laws and pets and assistance animals. But generally, with regards to service animals, as long as the owner has a visible disability and they're requesting a accommodation for a service animal that provides some sort of service, you are limited into what additional information you can request in order to determine whether or not to grant the accommodation. With emotional support animals, right, the disability is not readily available, or oftentimes it's not. And so in those cases, boards have the ability to ask a little bit more. But you're still limited to confirming whether the individual has a disability that meets the definition under Fair Housing Act. Whether the disability affects a major life function, they can't sleep, they can't walk, they can't work, so forth and so on. And then, what is the disability related need for the animal, right? Of course, if the disability is apparent or the need for the animal is apparent, then the questioning stops, and then obviously requesting additional information beyond that point could subject the association to potential legal challenge. So I strongly encourage board members, if you get a request for a service or an emotional support animal, be sure to review it with legal counsel so they can provide further guidance.
Let's go to Molly in Tampa. We are an HOA. We only have 2 board members, and we can't get a 3rd board member. Well, I've heard this one before, Kirsten. How do we get anything done to our property? We've tried so hard to get a 3rd board member. We can't trim trees or do pressure wash.
Well, if the bylaws only require a board of 3 directors, right? So there's a big if, right? But if that's the number of directors that have to serve on the board, and you have a board of at least 2 directors, then this board has actually enough directors to constitute a quorum to conduct business. So you don't have to have necessarily a full 3-member board in this case to function. As long as you have at least enough directors on the board to constitute a quorum, you can conduct business, you can enter into contracts, so forth and so on. So I would just encourage these board members to review the governing documents and maybe just consult with their legal counsel, property manager, just to confirm the size of the board.
I know you've heard this before, and we've talked about it on the show. People complain a lot about their boards, but you know what? Those same people don't go and run for their boards. I mean, if you want to get things done, you should run for your board, right?
I mean, that's the irony of the condo HOA world we live in. The complainers don't always want to be on the board.
Yeah, it's amazing. Is it a hard job, Kirsten?
To be on the board?
Yes.
I'm sure there are board members that would argue that yes. But at the end of the day, you're a board of volunteers, right? And so you're not expected to be an expert in all things, HOA condo, right? But you do have a fiduciary obligation to rely on your expert. So this is where your property manager, your accountant, your legal counsel, your engineer, architect, right? These are the experts that you should be seeking advice and relying on their advice in order to make business decisions for your community.
Robert in Tampa wants to know, can you have too many claims where we could actually lose our association insurance?
I mean, I suppose that's very possible. But this is more of a question that you should direct to your insurance agent. They're in a better position to answer this fully.
Okay, let's go to Kara in Tampa. Can you explain what is the authority of the Architecture Review Commission?
Okay, I presume they're referring to an architectural review committee, or perhaps it is referred in the documents as a commission. Generally speaking, an architectural review committee is a committee established by the board. And generally their function is to review requests for exterior alterations to a property, right? Whether it's condominium unit or a home in an HOA, right? So typically the association will have, a form, an architectural request form, the owner would have to fill out, complete. perhaps attach some specifications, design, pictures, and then they'd submit it to this committee. The committee would meet, review the request. They would have to confirm with their standards or specifications that have been adopted in the past as to whether the request complies with that. And then ultimately, either the committee renders the decision, or the committee then recommends a decision to the board, and the board ultimately makes a decision. So really the full scope of the committee would be determined by the governing documents, typically the declaration, whether of a condominium if you're in a condominium, or the declaration of covenants if you're in an HOA. And, it'll outline, what is the full function of this committee. Sometimes they have, authority to make decisions. Sometimes it's just advisory committee. So, I would just review the documents to get a full scope of the authority of the committee in this case.
I just wrote us, it's a board member wants to know, what's the number one question you get from board members?
Oh gosh, I don't know that there's one specific issue. Typically, as of late, we get a lot of records inspection inquiries, and sometimes it's owners complaining of what the board has done wrong, or claims of breach of fiduciary duty. So it's just a matter of reviewing the claim and doing some fact finding to figure out how best to proceed.
I guess there's associations across the state that want to know if they have the same, if other associations have the same questions that they do.
Sure. Sure.
And from our chat line, how can the membership remove a director from their position?
So, typically, directors are recalled by the members, so it does require a vote of the members. And I don't recall if you said this is a condo or an HOA, but in both cases, you require a vote of the majority of the membership. And a recall can be done either through what is known as a recall ballot or at a membership meeting. So if it's done through a recall ballot, the Division of Condominium actually has a form ballot that owners can use to recall directors, and you basically check the box. Alternatively, both statutes provide for the option to recall a director at a membership meeting.
Kathy in Tampa, many of our owners are aging out. Can the adult child serve on the board? These are condos that are handed down to the children. Do the children have any rights in the association? That's a good question.
So, if we're talking about who can serve on the board, then you're going to have to look to your articles of incorporation and bylaws to see what the qualifications of directors are. Typically the statute, both HOA and condo statute, just say that you can't be delinquent on assessments. And you can't be, you can't have a conviction and not have your civil rights restored within 5 years of seeking a position on the board. But it's very possible that the articles and bylaws might require a director to be an owner. That's not a specific requirement in the statute. Typically, it's addressed in the articles and or bylaws. And so if the articles and bylaws of this particular association require a director to be an owner, then, the question is this adult child a record title owner of the property? If so, then it seems like they would qualify to run and serve on the board. And if not, then, the answer is no.
I always talk about things I love about Kay Bender Rimbaum. One of the other things you do is you have so many educational classes that you do every month at no charge. You're always educating board members, management companies. You've got a lot of things going on in April. How about let's go over those?
Sure. Yes, we do spend a lot of time, preparing for and conducting these classes. And many of our classes are via Zoom, so webinars. So you can just log in and take a course at the convenience of your home or work. But we also do a lot of in-person seminars locally. So I would just encourage those who are interested in attending our classes, just go on our website and checking out our calendar. But for the month of April, we've got a few things happening. So we've got a Zoom meeting or a Zoom webinar April 8th. That's going to be conducted by one of our senior partners, Jeff Brembaum, and it's titled Before, During, and After the Storm, a board's operational playbook. No CU credits will be offered, so this is just more informational panel. On April 15th, we have a Zoom legal update of 2026 legislation. So legislation that took effect July 1st of 2025. That's for CAMs and for board members, and it does offer this class will satisfy the continuing education requirement for condominium board members. Okay. That's going to be taught at 2 p.m. On April 15th via Zoom. I will be teaching an HOA board member certification class on April 17th at 10 a.m. That will be via Zoom. And then my colleague, Alan Schwartzfeld, who manages the Orlando office, he and I will be teaching a condominium board member certification class on April 22nd at noon, starting at noon. That class is a 4-hour class, and we do take the full 4 hours. So if you're looking to take that one, just be prepared because it is 4 hours. And then for those of you who are in the Tampa area, the Tampa Expo will be held on April 10th. It is a full day event, and I will be teaching 2 classes at the Expo, one on HOA financial literacy and transparency. This will be a class that will cover only HOAs governed under Chapter 720 of the Florida statute, and it will satisfy continuing education credit requirement for HOA board members. And that's HOA under Chapter 720 of the Florida statute. And then in the afternoon, so that one's going to be 9 to 10. And then in the afternoon, I will be teaching the legal update from 2:30 to 4 o'clock. That will satisfy the condo board members' continuing education requirement. But again, it's going to go over the legislation that went into effect July 1st of 2025. So I've already taught this class at prior expos. I believe at the February Expo and October Expo of last year. So if you've attended any of these expos and sat in the legal update, it's going to be the same class taught in April. So don't need to sit through it again. That's it.
Hey, Kirsten, I think you do more classes than anybody in the firm. Your name comes up on all 3 of our shows of classes that you're doing.
We all try to do as many as we can, schedule permitting, of course.
We're going to go to break. Tell people how they can reach your office.
Yes, I can be reached through the main line, which is 954-928-0680, or via email at khenze, that's KHENZE, at kbrlegal.com.
We're going to go to a short break. When we come back, we have more with Kay Bender Rimbaum. Attorney Kirsten Hens will be right back.
Bender Rembaum is a full-service community association law firm dedicated to the representation of community associations throughout Florida. On kbrlegal.com, you can learn more about their offices in Pompano Beach, Palm Beach Gardens, Orlando, Tampa, as well as throughout Miami-Dade by appointment. Several K. Bender Rembaum attorneys are board-certified specialists in condominium and plan development law and assist clients with all matters of community association legal issues while keeping them up to date on new developments that affect their associations. K. Bender Rembaum is also a well-known provider of free legal education for managers and board members. Contact K. Bender Rembaum today by calling 800-974-0680. That's 800-974-0680 to reach any of their locations. You can also visit them online at kbrlegal.com or write to them at info@kbrlegal.com.
And we are back with the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV with your hosts, Steve-O, Sophia, and their expert guests.
We are back. This is our Tampa area show for K. Bender Rembaum this Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time. We do our South Florida K. Bender show. So you might want to tune in for that. And then the last Thursday of each month, we do our Orlando K. Bender Rembaum show. So we do 3 shows a month. And I got to tell you, I thought at one time the viewership would start to level out, and it just keeps getting larger and larger, and more people just compliment K. Bender Rembaum. We're here with attorney Kirsten Hens. We get your questions, and I got to tell you, this makes the show so easy to do that so many people send their questions in, and it's just, I've never had, over 16 years, I've never had a show so successful like this, and I always look forward to it. So, Kirsten, let's get back to our questions here. This is Richard in Plant City. He wants to know, how far in advance do condo elections notices need to go out, and what information needs to be on them?
So with condominium elections, they're heavily regulated by Florida statute and the Florida Administrative Code. So despite of what you might find in your bylaws, the requirements of the Florida statute will apply. And they require that you send out 2 notices of your annual election meeting. So the first notice has to be sent out to the membership at least 60 days prior to your annual election meeting. And the notice can be mailed, hand-delivered, or transmitted via email to those owners who have consented to receiving notices by email in writing. So you've got to make sure you have a written consent from the owner to send them notices via email. But the notice, excuse me, it's going to contain your typical information that you have to include in any notice, right? Your date, time, location of the meeting. Your first notice may also let owners know, those who are looking to run for the board would have to submit their notice of intent to run at least 45 days prior to the election. And then your second notice of the annual election meeting has to be sent to the membership at least 14 days prior to your meeting. And again, mailed, hand-delivered, or emailed to owners who have consented to receiving notices by email. Now, your second notice of your annual election meeting is also going to include your election ballot. So the election ballot is going to include the names of all the candidates in alphabetical order. And it's also going to include the inner and outer envelope, right? So many of you have already gone through a condo election. You fill out the election ballot, you stick it in a blank inner envelope, and then that envelope goes into another envelope, which is referred to as the outer envelope. And that envelope has to be signed by the owner and include a unit number. And then your second notice may also include information sheets, which are basically, perhaps a bio of the candidates, or some kind of letter from the candidate, letting the membership know, who they are, why they qualify to run for and serve on the board. And then you might have a proxy form that's in the event that you have other agenda items set for that meeting. So if you have other things that you want owners to vote on, other than the election, then it makes sense to include a proxy, and you might, depending on the issue, include a limited proxy. And then you may also include a voting certificate. Voting certificate basically designates, typically it applies if your unit is owned by more than one individual or by an entity, for example, and it will designate who among the multiple owners, or who, which authorized representative of the entity owner is authorized to cast a vote for the unit, right? And you would only send that out if your documents actually require that. But those are typically the forms or information that you would include with your second notice of annual meeting.
This is from Sony in Tampa. If a condo year is from January to December, when is the budget supposed to be finished?
So unless the bylaws, and this is only for condominiums, unless the bylaws provide something else, the statute was amended several years ago to require that the budget be adopted at least 14 days before the start of the association's fiscal year. So confirm exactly when the fiscal year starts, and unless your bylaws require for another time frame, right? If it might require you, the board, to adopt a budget, 30 days before the start of the new fiscal year, or 60 days. So I don't know. You'd have to confirm with your bylaws. But if your bylaws are otherwise silent, then the budget has to be adopted at least 14 days before the start of the fiscal year.
When in doubt, go to your docs, right?
For some things, yes.
Yes. So, okay, let's go to Cheryl in Palm Harbor. In an HOA, if I'm delinquent, and we get this question all the time, can I still run for the board?
So in HOAs, if the owner is delinquent on any monetary obligation owed to the association, so it would include not only assessments, but let's say fines have been imposed against the owner and they haven't been paid. So any monetary obligation owed to the association, if they're delinquent as of the date that they're last allowed to nominate themselves, they can't run for the board. And for HOAs, the date that they last can nominate themselves, will depend on, how HOA runs the election and what's provided in the bylaws. But typically, if nominations are allowed from the floor on the date of the annual meeting, then that would be the date that the owner can last nominate themselves. So they have to be current by that date.
I think this is from a relative of yours, Kenny in Land O'Lakes. I love your show. My staff loves your show. Can people running for the board send out bios?
Yes. With condominium, with condominium associations, the statute is very clear and addresses those types of bios, which I actually mentioned a question or two ago. The statute refers to them as information sheets, and clearly says that an owner can, or candidate can, submit an information sheet. Has to be submitted at least 35 days prior to the annual election meeting. And the statute and administrative code also say that if the association receives those information sheets, they are required to include that with the second notice of the annual election meeting. So you don't have an option. You've got to include it. And the information sheet has to be provided on a single page that is 8.5 by 11 inches. With HOAs, Chapter 720 of the Florida statute doesn't expressly address information sheets. So that's something that would be governed more by your election process as provided in the bylaw. So you'd have to take a look at the bylaws to see what it provides on information sheets.
Sybil in Tampa, what is the quorum at an annual meeting for HOA? If we can't get a quorum, does the old board roll over?
Yes, that's typically what happens. So with membership meetings, with membership meetings at and HOAs with annual election meetings, you have to establish quorum in order to proceed, right? And so if you don't have quorum, you can't conduct the meeting, you can't conduct the election. So generally, yes, the old board rolls over.
Okay. Josh in Clearwater, thank you for doing the show. I want you to know that we really do appreciate the work you do and that you come on every month with us. I just wanted to thank you. My question is, it seems if a proxy ballot for election, not a proxy for a quorum, it seems that this means that the owner's vote is not secret. Makes no sense. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, the only way that this would make sense is if we're talking about an HOA governed under Chapter 720 of the Florida statute, because if this was a scenario in a condominium, well, the statute, Chapter 718 of the Florida statute, is very clear that you cannot vote by proxy at a condominium election. With HOAs under Chapter 720, you may vote, at an election by proxy, provided your bylaws authorize that. And so you're right. If the bylaws allow for voting by proxy, then there is no secrecy to that vote. So if the board wants to, require secret ballots for elections in an HOA, then take a look at the bylaws, and you may have to consider amending your bylaws to institute, secret balloting, and then remove the option to vote by proxy.
Somebody just wrote in, this is a good question. Do you make presentations to associations about your company? She means your firm, probably.
Well, I'm not sure what presentation means. I mean, certainly if the board is looking to retain the firm, I'm happy to set up a courtesy Zoom call, or, depending on the location, attend in person, to discuss our services.
Yes.
But yes,
they're in Tampa. It says they're in Tampa. Okay. So let's give out your phone number while we've got him watching the show.
Sure. The main line, which is a South Florida area code, but it does connect to all the offices throughout the state, and it's 954-928-0680.
Okay. Jenny in Tampa. A lot of Tampa's today. Can we do our annual and our budget on the same date?
Yes. So the association can have the annual election meeting as well as adopt the budget on the same date. Just recognize that these are two different meetings, right? The board typically adopts the budget at a duly noticed board meeting. And then the annual election meeting is a membership meeting. So, you could do, the budget adopted first, followed, adjourn the budget meeting, and then call the annual election meeting to order, and then go ahead and have your election. Typically, following the annual meeting, there is an organizational meeting of the board that, again, typically follows the annual meeting, but you wouldn't necessarily adopt the budget at the organizational meeting. Typically, the sole purpose of that meeting is really just to organize officers, right? Appoint your president, vice president, treasurer, secretary. So no substantive agenda items are really conducted at the organizational meeting.
Okay. Again, someone just called. Can you just give the phone number one more time?
954-928-0680.
Okay. Let's go to Barbara in Clearwater. They're a condo. She said, we have no Kaufman language and we voted down the reserve. Do we still have to do SIRS study?
So the SIRS study, which is the Structural Integrity Reserve Study, that is a requirement for those condominiums that have at least 3 habitable stories. So if this particular condominium falls in that description, has at least 3 habitable stories, then yes, absolutely subject to the SIRS, even if there's no Kaufman language in the declaration.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to read. We've got so many questions coming in. I apologize. I'm a one-man show today. Rex in St. Pete, can a non-owner be allowed to attend our condo election meetings?
Typically, no. Typically, non-owners are not allowed to attend board meetings unless, of course, that individual can provide a valid power of attorney.
Okay, so that's a no. Okay, and then we got that. Let's go to Julie in Tampa. Our board for condo association passing a new amendment on renting says no more renting unless you own the property for 2 years. They want $150 for each person's background check. Can they actually do that?
Yes. So with regard to the amendment, amendments that prohibit leasing for a certain period of time after you take title to a unit or a parcel, that's typically, referred to as a lease moratorium. And they are valid provided you get the necessary approval that you are required to get under your declaration. A small caveat to that in a condominium setting is that there is the statute that I believe the amendment dates back to 2004, but the statute provides that if you are amending a declaration, a condo declaration that prohibits leasing or limits when or how often you can lease, then those types of amendments would only be effective against unit owners who voted in favor of the amendment, and then unit owners who take title to their units after the effective date of the amendment. Okay, so the big question here, and which I cannot answer, is whether or not that section of the statute applies to your condominium. And that is going to depend on whether or not your declaration has Kaufman language, which is the magic words as amended from time to time that is often referenced after Chapter 718 in your declaration. So typically within the first few pages of your declaration, you might have a provision that says, this condominium is subject to Chapter 718 of the Florida statute, and then it might say as amended from time to time. So if you have that Kaufman language, then this section of the statute would apply to your community. So you just have to be mindful as to against whom the amendment can apply. So that would be more of a legal question for the board to consult with legal counsel. But in terms of, there was also a second part to this about a fee, right? $150. Yeah, that is, typically referred to as a transfer fee or an application fee. And the statute authorizes associations to charge that fee, provided the governing documents give the board that authority. So again, you have to go back to your declaration or bylaws to see if the board is authorized to charge that fee. Presuming they can, this is the maximum fee that the condo board can charge at the moment. That fee is adjusted, I believe, every 5 years by the DBPR, pursuant to the Consumer Price Index. But that is the current rate, and it's a charge that can be charged per applicant, with the exception of married couples. They're considered one applicant, and then parent, and then dependent child. So they would be considered one applicant, and you'll be able to charge one fee for them.
Okay, and our last question of the day from Janice, HOA bylaws. And people, please, if you can, let us know if you're an HOA or a condo. It absolutely helps. HOA bylaws states declaration amendments can pass by vote, in person, or proxy. Member doesn't have a position for proposed amendment. Can he issue general proxy to allow appointee to vote its discretion?
So are they asking if the owner themselves can prepare some kind of proxy?
If the member doesn't have a position for proposed amendment. I didn't really understand. Can he issue a general proxy to allow the appointee? You know what? We'll put this on for our Thursday show, and we'll
typically, I will just generally say, if the board is proposing amendments to the governing documents, right, you'll have to provide a notice of the meeting, right, a copy of the proposed amendment. And then if the documents do allow voting in person or by proxy, then typically the board, and especially if you're in a condominium, you would issue a limited proxy. So a limited proxy is a little bit more detailed than a general proxy. It'll include the actual proposal that you want owners to vote on. So you'll send that to the owners, and then owners who don't show up at the meeting, don't want to, they can always vote by filling out the proxy, checking, yes or no for the amendment, and then, emailing it back or mailing it back or hand delivering it back to the association or manager. Those owners who do end up showing up to the meeting in person and want to vote in person can do so by ballot. So just make sure you have, ballots at the meeting. Okay.
Wow, we got through another show. Great job as always. Kirsten will be back again with us next month. Again, her show's the last Tuesday at 5 p.m. We so appreciate you. We'll see you next month. Hey, have a wonderful Easter, Kirsten.
Thanks, Steve. Happy Easter as well to you and to everyone listening.
That's attorney Kirsten Hens. K. Bender Rimbaum. That's going to do it for us today. We'll be back with you next week with more Ask the Experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Experts show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.